All right, hello everyone. Today we've got Randall Jacobs from THESIS Bike here live in person. We're going to talk to him about the THESIS Bike Company and what his inspiration was. We actually just got back from a sample ride here in Marin County riding the new OB1 bike, and I'm really excited to introduce everybody to Randall. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I always like to start by finding out a little bit about your background as a rider. Did you start more on the mountain bike side or on the road side?
So I started racing mountain bikes actually at 18 as an undergraduate. So I was playing football, broke my foot. The bicycle was the first thing I could do, and took to the bicycle on the mountain bike side and did the collegiate series, found that I was reasonably good at it and stuck with it. It's become a real lifestyle ever since.
Okay, and did that lead you into other elements of the sport?
So I went on to move overseas for a period and rode on and off. When I was 25, I had a kind of a life event where my father became sick. And so I was looking at where he was, he had a brain tumor at the time. So pretty bad prognosis.
Right.
And I said, what are the things I'd like to accomplish if I was in his position? Being a pro athlete was one of those things. So I started training full time. Was lucky to win a couple of national championships as an amateur shortly after he passed, and then spent the subsequent couple of years living out of my Honda Element, traveling around the country with a fleet of bicycles that was worth probably 5x what the car was worth.
So you were racing on the national mountain bike scene at that point?
Yeah, so I was you could say pack fodder on the U.S. Cup circuit, and then I'd have a few good results on the local circuits.
What a great journey spending that much time doing it. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of people aspire to, just following their dreams of bike racing and going out there and doing it. And it's certainly not without its sacrifices. Yeah,
certainly I was fortunate in my case. I had started a career in international trade and supply chain architecture where I could work remotely anywhere in the world. So in that regard, it didn't cost too much. But you definitely put certain other things on hold being on the road all the time.
So when you hung up your racing cleats, what was next for you professionally?
So from there, I started a product development company where we were working with the same set of Chinese manufacturers that I had cultivated during my period running product and market development for a Chinese trading and manufacturing company. Then sold that company to one of our partners and went to work for Specialized. This is 2013. While at Specialized, the Diverge project was in its early days. I actually ended up naming that bike and was the product developer for that project. So, doing all the spec and builds and negotiating all the deals with the vendors and so on, and kind of coordinating the product spec and supply chain sides.
So you were helping sort of spec out the supply chain and the specifications for the original Diverge bike while you were there?
Correct. Yeah, and doing a lot of the field testing and component compatibility testing to make sure everything was fully dialed, which is where you see my obsessive attention to detail come in on things.
And that Diverge bike, it was really one of the first production quote unquote gravel bikes to hit the market from a big manufacturer. Is that right?
You could, yeah, for sure. The first gravel bike that was called a gravel bike. There have been people riding cross bikes for quite some time. When that bike came out, it was the early days of drop bar disc brakes, which really opened up a lot, not just for braking power and modulation, but also for tire clearance. That was the key enabling technology that allowed you to have the sort of bikes we have today. The other one being tubeless tires, and in today's world, tubeless tires with a really wide rim. It allows you to have a bicycle, a drop bar bike that is fast like a road bike on the road, that is as capable or more so than what a mountain bike would have been not too long ago.
Gotcha. So the Diverge, was it the end all be all? Was it everything you wanted to make as a gravel bike?
No, there are constraints on what we were able to do at that time for a variety of reasons. When you work for a big company, there's always going to be product decisions that are more due to cost structure, or needing to support a certain margin structure or support a certain marketing story. And, so with the OB1, it was really something I had been incubating for quite some time. And it's my opportunity to have, unfettered approach to products from the ground up. So I've had to compromise on nothing, not tire clearance, not some, stick on or bolt on magic elastomers attached to the frame, like nothing. Just went ground up with pure kind of evidence-based curation of the components and the setup.
Interesting. So we're here to talk about your new company that you co-founded, THESIS Bike, and you just referenced your first model, the OB1. Some of the motivation has already come out in the conversation about why you wanted to start this company, but why now? What are the trends you're seeing? You're doing some unique stuff at THESIS that we'll get into as far as the bike itself and the business model, but why now, and why are you guys the people to do it?
Well, so I think that if you look at what we're doing, the primary innovation here is business model. But the product itself is, you have to start with a really cool product. And this has been one I've been thinking about for a while. So let's start with the product itself. So you saw bikes like the Open Up and Upper come online, which really kind of brought a monster cross almost capability in a form factor that is more akin to like an endurance road bike that's slacked out a little bit. We want to go a step further. So if you look, we don't do a frame set, we do a complete bike. Our complete bike is the cost of frame sets from the companies we're competing with, and that's enabled by the business model innovation. But on the product side, things like a flat top handlebar with a shallow drop that's got a 10 degree flare, so you have you're narrow and relatively aero on the hoods. But in the drops, you have that additional control, which is beneficial not just in gravel, but also when you're just doing a road descent. You just have that much more leverage, or even like in a sprint. So you see like on Envy's road handlebars, they have a model that has a 4 degree flare, little subtle thing. And I think you'll see flare bars start to catch on across disciplines, even with roadies, or at least the more progressive roadies who aren't so traditional in their equipment choices. On the wheels, like we do the same, 650B, 700C wheel package options. In our case, both wheel packages are, it's a high-end carbon rim. With the 650B, we go really wide, so 27.3 internal width, so it's 33.3 external. And what that does is it takes, a tire like the WTB Byway, which we're having standard, and it brings it out to from 47 to almost 50 millimeters, and changes the profile such that the side knobs engage a bit sooner, and you can drop the pressure down and not have the tire flopping around. So I'll ride out to the trail chasing down roadies at 45 psi, and then I'll drop it down to 30 in the rear and 27 in the front, and ride it like a full-on cross-country bike, and I'm passing people on dualies. So that's another kind of small detail that with the flare bar. The other thing being the dropper post, which you experienced today, which really transforms the bike. It is anyone who's coming from the mountain scene knows that you'd probably rather give up a couple inches of suspension rather than your dropper. On the gravel bike, it's that much more game changing because you're starting with no suspension.
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting bike swap moment for me, and Randall generously let me take the dropper post on all the descents today. So I had a good time doing that. And it was interesting because I've ridden the dropper post on my mountain bike quite regularly for, the last half dozen years or so. And I was quite familiar with the benefits to that. With the gravel bike, it was interesting creating that sort of pocket of space underneath me because I simply wasn't familiar with it ever doing that on a drop bar bike. And I definitely appreciated, well, one, the tight integration with the lever. So that on the SRAM shifter, Randall has hacked it so that it controls the dropper post for you. So instead of having a front chainring shifter, I can shift the dropper post down right from the handlebars. Yeah,
and that's a pretty simple hack that we'll be documenting with a video real soon. But essentially with SRAM's modern hydraulic front shifters, there's a 1-minute hack that's fully reversible to remove the ratchet mechanism to allow that shift lever to swing freely and thus actuate the dropper post.
Yeah.
Which is really, slick. I use it more than I ever used a front derailleur.
So it's interesting, as most people who listen to this podcast know, I tend to ride my gravel bike on more mountain bikey style terrain than the kind of flowy fire roads that are often known in other parts of the country for gravel. So for me, this is something I've been thinking about for a while, checking out a dropper post. So it was a lot of fun. And I definitely will say that if you're on the type of steep terrain that sort of characterizes some of Marin County, it's definitely a value add. And there's a small weight penalty, but not a dramatic weight penalty given the sort of benefits of speed going down.
Yeah, and in general, there's this common weight weeniest misconception, I'll describe it as, where you pick up a bike and you say, oh, that's really light, it must be fast. But really, there's a lot of ways in which you can make a bike heavier and faster. So as an example, like the dropper post, you're able to descend that much faster, not just on the super steep terrain that we were riding today, but even on like less steep but really fast terrain with loose sweepers, where you don't drop it all the way down, you drop it down just enough so that you have a little bit more control and you can shift your weight back and so on, and you go in with more confidence. The other thing is you can brake that much harder, so you're braking vastly more with the rear brake versus the front brake. And you can brake with both of them in a holy crap sort of situation and have more traction and not be ready to go over the handlebars like you would be if you were kind of sitting on top of a fully extended post.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we will definitely start to see more and more of.
Yeah,
I think there is somewhat of a sentiment in gravel to be respectful of our road brethren, and the changes maybe are slower to be adopted for more aesthetic reasons than anything else. But I can definitely vouch for the sort of performance benefit of the dropper post from what I've evidenced today in today's short ride.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about a little bit more about the frame set. So it's a carbon frame set, correct?
Yeah, full carbon frame set.
And you've got a lot of mounts spec'd on there, which I think is interesting. So let's talk about the mounts and some of the other things that make this bike essentially a quiver killer, something that you can replace your road bike and many other bikes in your garage.
Mm-hmm. So the frame set, full carbon frame and fork, using the same Toray carbon fiber that everybody else uses. In our case, it's T700, T800. Other people give it some fancy acronym for the same thing. But it's all mostly coming from the same place. In terms of, we've done a few things that are common and a few things that are unique. So on the common side, we have a full suite of bosses. So this is, standard cable cage mounts inside the frame, a third cage on the down tube, a bento up top. But we've also added on the fork blades 2 more bottle cage bosses that are also, sturdy enough to handle a front rack. We have rear rack mounts as well, so you could set this up for a full touring setup and put 10 kilos or more on the front and 15 on the back, plus a frame bag and be on your way for your next epic adventure. Some other smaller details that I think are really important are on the fork. Fork steerer failure has always been a big concern of mine. You've seen a bunch of recalls in the industry, some of them associated with improper manufacturing, but some of them associated with the clamping force of the stem actually crushing the carbon. And so if anyone in the audience has built a carbon frame with a carbon steerer before, they'll see that you have this expansion plug that goes in. And we looked at all of them, and none of them that we found on the open market did a good job of supporting fully the steerer. So we actually bonded in an aluminum tube with a built-in star nut into our forks, which you can cut and shorten it. And that's just like a safety feature so that you really, there's no way to install it improperly because you don't install it. It's already there. And if you're traveling a lot and you're removing your stem and reinstalling it, there's no way to, you can over torque it, but it's still not going to crush that carbon. Carbon's a brilliant material in tension, but it's terrible in compression. So that was another small detail where we really paid a lot of attention. The other thing that you noticed is we decided to forego the drop stay, which you see on a bike like the Open or the new Ibis Haka. Those bikes accommodate a slightly larger tire. I think they can go up to like a 2.2. Our bicycle is optimized around a 650B by 47, which has the same radius as a 700 by 30. and that's actually what we use on the road wheel set with a wide aero rim. And we went that route with a wide rim that expands the tire to almost 50 millimeters. And what we find is that, that is kind of the sweet spot for maintaining a road geometry and look and feel while still giving you, all the capabilities of a borderline monster cross or light XC sort of bike.
Gotcha. And you're offering both a single chainring and a double chainring.
Correct.
Build.
Yeah, and if you're considering going with so I'm one by all the way myself. We're offering the double because there's a lot of people who want to go that route. So you can talk about pluses and minuses there. The one by, you get the clutch, so the chain's not slapping around. It also frees up the left shift lever for the dropper, which I think is once you've experienced it, you won't want to ride without it. I think it's really a game changer as much as anything else you can do. But yeah, we'll do a 2x as well. And in both cases, you have a few different gearing options, so you can really dial it in. So you live in, you're not super fit, and you live in a really hilly area. Go with a 38 or a 40 in the front. If you're more, if you're super fit and you're in a flatter area, go with a 46 with a 1042 in the rear to give you plenty of high end. Same with the double side. We're working on some. More like 4630 or 4832 options. We're just doing the compatibility testing right now before we offer it.
And you guys, have, in addition to designing the frame, you've also designed the wheel set and some of the other components. Is that right?
Well, so this word designed, we started with a frame set that had all of the characteristics that we wanted. Same is true for the rims. And that's true in wheels in particular. Almost nobody's designing their own rims. Or if they do, they just spec a profile and they say, hey, engineer at the factory, please do the layup for me.
Right.
So we started with a frame that met the vast majority of our criteria and then worked with the factory on over 100 different line item changes to bring it up to where we thought it needed to be. So simple things from adding additional chainring clearance to adding 3K carbon weave reinforcement under every single boss and cutout in the frames to give it that much more strength and fray resistance. Adding fiberglass at all the interfaces with metal so you don't get galvanic corrosions. All these like little granular things that you don't think about until it's a year down the road and you're trying to remove your seat post and it won't come out because it's bonded to the carbon. Like we did all of those things, at a very focused level.
Now, presumably you were traveling overseas to work directly with the factory?
Oh, yeah. So I've spent a couple weeks in the factories and then quite a bit of time, late at night on calls there. One thing that gives us a big advantage is, so I've been working in supply chain since I started working. So this is back when I was 21. I'm approaching 36 now. I'm a fluent Mandarin speaker. So that allows a degree of relationship and interaction that's just not possible if you're an English speaker. So, I go into a factory and I don't just speak English with the boss. I am speaking Mandarin with the line worker to understand, what is the process that they're going through as they're making that part? What are the common failure modes as they're doing that so that we can then work with the engineers to kind of design around that. And this is something that's really important to me and that I enjoy doing tremendously.
For those of our listeners who aren't that familiar with the bike industry, how different is that process from what a major manufacturer goes through? Are you dealing with the same types of factories, the same types of materials that you would be at a Specialized or a Trek?
Yeah. There's everyone's sourcing from the same subset of factories, using the same materials, the same manufacturing techniques. There's almost nothing new that's in our industry. Or rare do you come across something new, which is why you see quite a bit of odd-looking innovation that doesn't, it seems to have, like it might be plausible, but in effect, it's really just a way of trying to stand out in some way. So part of our thesis is that, we innovate only where that innovation provides a genuine benefit to the customer. So as an example, like on our wheel set, we didn't design a custom profile. We went and found one of the best manufacturers in China who's manufacturing rims for all the big players, and they had an off-the-shelf rim that we work with them to modify the layup slightly to make it optimized for a gravel application. So in our case, that meant taking a mountain bike rim with a mountain bike width that gives you that tire stability on the 650B set, and lightening the layup because it doesn't need quite as much of a burly build as it would for, say, an enduro application for which it was designed.
Gotcha. So in addition to the sort of manufacturing process of the bike, you're reinventing how you're going to sell to customers. Obviously, selling direct is not something totally new, but for the bike industry and customers purchasing a bike, it is a relatively new experience to go direct to a smaller brand and buy online. Can you just talk a little bit about that decision and the type of relationship you want to foster with the customers and why you thought it was important to go direct?
Sure. From a product standpoint, it allows us to offer a very granular degree of customization. So, when you buy a traditional bike, you're buying a complete bike. So if the handlebar width isn't right, the crank length isn't right, the gearing isn't right, you're then spending money after the fact to swap that out, or you're just dealing with it. And that's unfortunate given how many times that bike has been marked up and what you're paying for it. The other thing is, so our price point is $3,000, right? $2,999. And for what we offer, that is, there's nothing else that approaches that. You can buy frames, competing frame sets that cost that much or even slightly more. And the way that we're able to accomplish that is by being as close to factory direct as you can get. And it's actually better than factory direct because when you go factory direct, first off, no factory is going to sell you one handlebar. Right, so you need a certain amount of buying volume to get that pricing, and additionally, component compatibility. You'd have to deal with how do I spec my bike with all these components that I've curated. You don't have the same access to information and resources that, say, somebody on the inside like myself is fortunate to have. So we took a model where. And we work directly with the same factories who are supplying all the big brands. We work with their top-of-the-line open components. So we have a hollow forge crank from Samox that is lighter than a rival and comes with a spindly chain ring, and it's a really stiff and bomb-proof package that can take a rock strike, as but one example. Same with our frame sets, same with our wheel packages, and so on. And then we do assembly of the wheels and bundling of certain components in China and ship those out. And then we bundle all the components from Taiwan and we ship those out from there. So you receive 2 boxes of components that have been validated to work really well with each other and that you've been able to customize to your particular body, your use case, and even to your style. If you want you had a baby blue car with little metallic flecks in the paint when you were in high school or something like that, and you want to replicate that, send us a Pantone number, and for a small upcharge, we'll get you exactly that color that you want.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then so you mentioned 2 boxes are going to get shipped. Mm-hmm. Ergo, the bike is not assembled.
Correct.
When it arrives. So
yeah,
that's a little bit different than some of the other direct-to-consumer brands who are touting all you need is an Allen wrench and you'll be ready to go in 5 minutes. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So there are some brands that I've heard do a pretty good job there. Canyon is one that stands out. They do a pretty good quality build, is what I've heard from mechanics. But that is not the general standard. So if you talk to mechanics who work in shops, the really good ones tend to disassemble a factory-built bike and then reassemble it to make sure it's done right. It's just hard to get that attention to detail on a mass assembly line. Furthermore, they're not fit to the rider, and so you're still having to do a bunch of tweaking and so on. Our part, again, going back to why we named the company Thesis, we saw a way to both have the net cost to the rider be lower and get them a product that fits them and their riding style much better. $3K for that package, and then you can have it assembled locally a frame up assembly, I know at Sports Basement, is $280. And now you have a local mechanic who did that build to your standard, helped you tweak it and fit it and so on. Obviously, a full-on custom fit is going to be a little bit more money, but that's the case with all of these bikes. Nobody's bundling in a fit. Furthermore, and it would cost us more to ship everything to a single facility, have it assembled probably poorly or not as well as it could be done locally, and then put it in a big box, yet another bit of packaging, and put it in a big box and then ship it with higher tariff codes to some location where you receive it and still have to finish putting it together, and it's probably not dialed and tuned properly.
Right.
So, we looked at experience, quality of product, and the net cost to consumer all being, having a big advantage with this type of model.
Yeah. Interesting. So the bike, the OB1, really can be quite a versatile chassis, if you will. It can be almost a platform for every type of riding that you want to do. As we've talked over the day, we've talked about road riding. So talk about the OB1 as a road bike.
Well, so, the gravel bikes in general are just the road bikes that the industry should have been selling regular people all along. So you look at a road bike, and generally they're a race replica. The head tubes are short, the steering is more aggressive, the tires are really skinny. People are still riding 23C tires at 130 psi, which not only is not comfortable, it's actually slower than a higher volume tire. Not to mention, the braking on carbon rims in the wet and all these other issues you have with road bikes. When you have a bike like, when you have a gravel bike, and the OB1 we designed to be it's the OB1 because it's the one bike for every road. So as a road bike, it's got an endurance road type geometry. And with the road wheel package, it's a 44 depth, 22 internal, 30 external that we pair with a supple 30 millimeter tubeless tire from WTB that rides super smooth and is super fast. So I'll take that bike and go out and hammer with the local hammerheads on, Scotty's ride or some of the longer road rides that we see out here and keep up just fine. Like there's no deficit. And actually with the dropper, I'm descending faster than they are because I can do it more confidently and I'm more aero because I can get into that crazy tuck. You get a lot of questions with the dropper. On the gravel side, we spoke about, the advantages of the flare bar and the dropper and swapping in the 650B wheel set. In my case, on my road wheel set, I run a 1042 to give me a little bit taller high end. And then on the gravel set, I run an 1136, which gives me a little bit more low end. So I can, climb up all the dirt walls here in Marin. For touring, the geometry is long and stable enough where you can do light touring, which with today's gear is entirely possible. It'll take 10 plus kilos in the front, 15 in the rear, has all the bosses for that. If you're bike packing, it has plenty of room in the front triangle, and again has all the mounting points for anything you'd want to take. And if you look at the actual differences between these types of bikes, it's mostly tire clearance, mounting points, and marketing. That's the primary differences between a road bike and a gravel bike and a cross bike and all these other bikes. Some might add geometry, but that's more at the extremes. And so with the OB1, we have a geometry that is kind of, the overlapping point in the Venn diagram of all these different sub-niches. So you really can have one bike for everything. And with this bike, we wanted to demonstrate that the myth of N+1, which is used to sell more bikes, is false. You don't need, at most, you need one bike with two wheel sets.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that's a realization that many cyclists will come to in time. And it's fascinating to me. And for those of my listeners who have listened for a long time, they know my journey to gravel riding came from this notion of bike packing that I never truly realized, but having a bike in the closet that enabled me to ride on the road, ride on gravel, which is my primary pursuit, and occasionally get out there and do some light touring or bike packing really was a revelation.
Yeah.
And the realization that one bike really could do it all. And frankly, like when I'm on a group road ride, it's not my bike that's the limiting factor. It's generally my legs. which goes to show like the bike I'm riding and I think your bike as well, it can do it all when you're really honest about the type of rider that you are and can be. Like neither one of us are on the pro tour, so we're not looking for marginal gains on the extremes.
And those marginal gains are very marginal. 80% of your aerodynamic drag is your body. A good chunk of what remains is the wheels, and we have an aerodynamic wheel set that's paired with the wide tires. So you really can get very close to the bleeding edge and still not have a machine that is compromised for every other application you use it for. If you're going to go out and do the local crits and you're a Pro 1-2, get a road bike. For all the rest of us, get one really good bike. You'll have a much better time, and you'll probably be faster with that one good bike versus spreading those same resources over several mediocre ones.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting bike. It's a beautiful bike. I encourage everybody to go to the website. I'll put that in the podcast notes so people can check it out, because I think it's a bike that begs to be looked at. I think you show a lot of the different ways in which the bike can be used on the website, which is great. I think it gives our listeners a lot to think about. Mm-hmm. So what's next for THESIS Bike? When can we order one? How can people find you? How can they learn more about the philosophy and just get to understand the brand and you as a designer?
So by the time you broadcast this podcast, we will probably have sales live or be approaching it. We have a wait list currently that is getting increasingly long. We've done a few sales with friends and family at this point just to run them through the buying process and work out all the kinks before we open it up to a general audience. But yeah, we're expecting within the next couple of weeks. So by the time this podcast goes out. As far as what's next for THESIS, we mentioned that the bike is 90% unassembled. We have some very interesting partnerships in the works for local assembly and are hoping to have that as a checkbox option at checkout when you buy your OB1. Part of the vision here, in addition to wanting to make a great product and have an innovative business model, is to really provide an opportunity for these unsung heroes of the bike industry, your mechanics and your fitters, as well as the factories that are actually producing and increasingly engineering things. But mechanics and fitters, for them to have new and better opportunities to be compensated for the work they do. So having a model where a mechanic can get paid for their expertise in helping you with your curation and fit experience, and then make money on the assembly experience as well, and have instead of an oppositional relationship between mechanic and customer, where the customer doesn't know if the mechanic is just trying to sell them something, have a relationship where those two parties are working together to provide that rider with the best experience possible, whether it be with equipment or maintaining that equipment and so on. The single biggest investment, return on investment that you can get in cycling is not equipment. It may be diet, but after diet and training is definitely professional build and fit. It will unlock so much. You'll be more comfortable. Your equipment will last far longer. And we want to see have a model that it provides the right incentive structure where people take advantage.
Interesting. Well, we definitely look forward to learning more about that. If people have questions for you, are there social channels they can connect with you on, or email, website? What do you like? You
can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and so on, or drop us a line. You can drop me a line at randall@thesis.bike, or if you just have general questions, just hello@thesis.bike.
Okay, great. Well, best of luck with the brand. I look forward to riding with you again and continuing to spend a little bit more time on the bike. As I said, my initial ride shows it's a lot of fun. So yeah. I'm looking forward to it, and I wish you guys all the best. And for my listeners, definitely check out the website. I'll put that in the media podcast notes so people can find you easily. And I hope you have a great summer with this.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Looking forward to that next ride.
Awesome. Once again, another fun episode. It was great to test that THESIS bike out with Randall on some of my local trails, and really fun to have him in the studio with us today. As always, I welcome your feedback. You can hit me up on Instagram @thegravelride, directly via email, craig@thegravelride.bike. If you have a moment, do me a favor. Please email this episode to one of your fellow gravel riding friends. It really helps spread the word. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.